The industrial titans, the Rockefellers. Picture this. Someone figured out how to turn black goo from the ground into the most powerful empire in human history. That's the Rockefeller story. They didn't just strike oil, they basically invented the concept of striking it rich. John D. Rockefeller started Standard Oil in the 1870s and proceeded to monopolize the entire petroleum industry like he was playing a real-life game of Monopoly. Except instead of buying Boardwalk and Park Place, he bought every oil refinery, pipeline, and gas station in America. By the time the government said, hey, maybe one guy shouldn't control literally all the oil, the Rockefellers had already accumulated wealth that would make modern billionaires look like they were collecting pocket change. We're talking about a family that at their peak controlled about 90% of American oil production. Their wealth is so old and established that it's survived multiple generations, world wars, economic crashes, and probably the invention of electricity itself. Today, the Rockefeller name is still synonymous with obscenely wealthy and probably owns something you use every day without realizing it. They've got more foundations, trusts, and charitable organizations than most countries have government departments. When Rockefellers give money away, they don't just write checks, they build entire universities and museums. It's like having so much money that your hobby becomes creating institutions that will outlast civilization. The family motto might as well be, we turn dinosaur juice into generational wealth, and you're still buying gas from companies we probably still have stakes in. The railroad royalty, the Vanderbilts. Imagine someone looked at the entire concept of transportation in America and said, I'm going to own all of this. That was Cornelius Vanderbilt, who built a shipping and railroad empire so massive that his descendants are still living off the interest from the interest. The Vanderbilts didn't just build railroads, they basically invented the idea that controlling how people and goods move around the country is the ultimate cheat code for wealth accumulation. While everyone else was figuring out how to get from point A to point B, the Vanderbilts owned the tracks, the trains, and probably points A and B as well. Their Newport mansions aren't houses. They're basically American palaces that make European castles look like cute cottages. The Breakers, their summer cottage, has 70 rooms and was built as a casual vacation home. Imagine being so wealthy that a 70-room mansion is where you go to relax. The Vanderbilt legacy is still visible today in universities they founded, museums they built, and probably half the infrastructure you use without thinking about it. They turn transportation into generational wealth so efficiently that their descendants can afford to be eccentric artists and philanthropists instead of working regular jobs. When your great-great-grandfather built the railroads that connected America, you don't really need to worry about your career prospects. You're basically born with a trust fund attached to the entire concept of American commerce. The steel supremacy, the Carnegies. Andrew Carnegie looked at the Industrial Revolution and thought, someone's going to need a lot of steel for all these buildings and bridges, might as well be me selling it to them. He proceeded to corner the steel market so thoroughly that his name became synonymous with American industrial might. Carnegie Steel wasn't just a company. It was basically the backbone of American infrastructure development. Every skyscraper, bridge, and railroad track needed Carnegie Steel, making him essentially the supplier for the entire country's growth spurt. But here's where the Carnegie story gets interesting. Andrew Carnegie pioneered the concept of giving it all away before you die. He spent the last part of his life systematically donating his fortune to build libraries, schools, and cultural institutions across America. The Carnegie libraries are still everywhere. Over 2,500 libraries built with Carnegie money, because apparently when you control the steel industry, your retirement plan involves making sure everyone in America can access books. It's like the ultimate humble brag. I made so much money from steel that I can afford to educate entire generations. Carnegie Hall in New York, Carnegie Mellon University, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, all built with steel money, proving that sometimes the best way to be remembered isn't for what you sold, but for what you gave away. The Carnegie legacy is everywhere you look, from the buildings you work in, to the libraries you visit, to the universities that educated your professors. They turned molten metal into cultural immortality. The banking behemoths, the Morgans. If other families controlled industries, J.P. Morgan controlled the money that controlled the industries. The Morgan banking dynasty didn't just participate in American capitalism. They basically invented modern American finance and then charged everyone else admission to play. JP Morgan was so powerful that during financial panics, the US government would literally ask him to help stabilize the economy. Imagine being so wealthy that when the entire country's financial system is collapsing, politicians call you instead of figuring it out themselves. Morgan didn't just run a bank. He assembled what was essentially the Financial Justice League of America. He financed the creation of General Electric, US Steel, and AT&T, basically building the corporate foundation of modern America from his office on Wall Street. The Morgan family turned money into an art form. They collected rare books, priceless art, and historical artifacts with the same casual attitude most people collect coffee mugs. The Morgan Library in New York isn't just a library. It's basically a temple to the idea that extreme wealth can be converted into cultural preservation. When your family name is literally synonymous with banking, you don't really worry about things like credit scores or loan applications. You're more likely to be the one deciding whether entire countries get to borrow money. The Morgan legacy lives on in JP Morgan Chase, one of the largest banks in the world, proving that sometimes the best way to stay wealthy is to be the people who handle everyone else's money. The automotive aristocrats, the Fords. Henry Ford didn't just build cars. He revolutionized the entire concept of manufacturing and accidentally created the modern middle class by paying his workers enough to buy the products they were making. It's like he invented capitalism with a conscience, then got incredibly rich from it. The Ford Motor Company wasn't just an automaker. It was a social experiment that proved you could make massive profits while also improving workers' lives. The $5 workday was revolutionary because most employers were paying about half that, making Ford simultaneously a business genius and an accidental social reformer. But the Ford family wealth goes beyond just making cars. They turned automotive success into generational influence through the Ford Foundation, one of the largest charitable organizations in the world. When your family foundation has an endowment worth billions, you're not just rich, you're institutional. The Ford legacy shaped American society in ways most people don't realize. They didn't just put America on wheels. They created the economic conditions that made car ownership possible for regular people, basically inventing the concept of mass consumer culture. Today, Ford descendants don't need to work in the automotive industry because the family wealth has diversified into everything from philanthropy to arts funding. When your great-grandfather invented the assembly line, you can afford to pursue careers in things like interpretive dance or rescuing endangered butterflies. The Ford name represents the weird American dream of making money by making life better for everyone, then using that money to make life even better for even more people. It's capitalism with a social studies textbook. The railroad robber barons, the Huntingtons. Collis Huntington looked at the western United States and saw the biggest construction project in human history, building railroads across mountains, deserts, and basically every type of terrain that engineers said was impossible to cross. The Huntington family didn't just build the Central Pacific Railroad, they connected California to the rest of America, basically finishing the country's transportation network and getting incredibly wealthy in the process. When you own the only way to get people and goods across the country, you own the country. But the Huntingtons were also master politicians, lobbying the government for land grants, subsidies, and favorable legislation with the skill of professional influence peddlers. They turned railroad construction into a partnership with the federal government, where taxpayers funded the infrastructure and the Huntingtons kept the profits. The family wealth enabled them to become major art collectors and cultural patrons. The Huntington Library and Gardens in California isn't just a library. It's basically a private kingdom of rare books, priceless art, and botanical gardens that rivals anything in Europe. Huntington descendants turned railroad money into cultural institutions, proving that sometimes the best way to whitewash a robber baron reputation is to build beautiful libraries and donate art collections that make people forget how you got rich in the first place. The Huntington legacy is literally built into American geography. Every time you travel between states, you're probably using infrastructure that exists because the Huntingtons figured out how to make transcontinental transportation profitable. The oil oligarchs, the Gettys. J. Paul Getty took the Rockefeller playbook and applied it globally, building an oil empire that spanned continents and accumulated wealth that made him one of the richest people in human history. At his peak, Getty was worth more than most countries' annual budgets. The Getty family didn't just find oil, they turned petroleum exploration into a science, developing extraction techniques and global supply chains that made their wells more profitable than other people's entire companies. But Getty wealth comes with Getty drama. The family is famous not just for their billions, but for kidnappings, family family feuds, and the kind of personal scandals that make soap operas look boring. When you're that wealthy, even your family problems become international news. The Getty legacy lives on through the Getty Center in Los Angeles, one of the most impressive art museums and research institutions in the world. It's like they turned oil money into cultural immortality, creating a temple to human creativity funded by extracting dinosaur remains from the earth. Getty descendants don't just inherit money, they inherit the responsibility of managing cultural institutions, art collections, and philanthropic organizations that employ thousands of people and educate millions more. The Getty name represents the weird transformation of natural resources into cultural preservation, proving that sometimes the people who take things out of the ground end up putting the most beautiful things into the world. The Copper Kings, the Guggenheims. The Guggenheim family looked at the mining industry and said, what if we didn't just dig holes in the ground, but figured out how to make digging holes the most profitable activity in human history? They proceeded to dominate copper, silver, and lead mining across multiple continents. Meyer Guggenheim started with a small investment in Colorado mines and ended up controlling metal production from Alaska to Chile. The family didn't just mine metals, they revolutionized extraction techniques, smelting processes, and global distribution networks. But the Guggenheims are probably better known today for what they did with their mining fortune. They turned metal money into cultural institutions. The Guggenheim Museum in New York isn't just an art museum, it's an architectural masterpiece that Frank Lloyd Wright designed as a temple to human creativity. The Guggenheim Foundation doesn't just fund artists, it essentially sponsors human creativity, giving fellowships to writers, researchers, and artists whose work might change how we understand the world. Guggenheim descendants transformed from metal merchants into cultural patrons, proving that sometimes the best use of industrial wealth is funding the kinds of human expression that have nothing to do with industry. The Guggenheim legacy is visible every time you see modern art, experimental literature, or innovative research, because their foundation has been quietly funding creative people for generations. The tobacco titans, the Dukes. James Buchanan. Duke figured out that people's addiction to nicotine could be converted into generational wealth, building the American Tobacco Company into one of the most profitable monopolies in American history. The Duke family didn't just sell tobacco, they industrialized addiction, creating cigarette manufacturing processes that made smoking affordable and convenient for millions of people. They basically invented modern tobacco marketing while accumulating wealth that would last centuries. But here's where the Duke story gets interesting. They used tobacco money to build Duke University, essentially converting cigarette profits into educational excellence. It's like they said, we'll help create the health problems and fund the research to solve them. Duke Power Company, founded with tobacco money, became one of the largest utility companies in the South, proving that diversification is key when your original product might eventually be regulated out of existence. Duke descendants live with the weird legacy of wealth built on a product that's now known to be harmful, but they've channeled that wealth into education, healthcare, and research that has probably saved more lives than tobacco cost. The Duke name appears on hospitals, universities, and research facilities that are working to cure diseases, some of which were probably caused by the products that created the family fortune in the first place. The sugar barons, the dominoes. Henry O. Havemeyer built the American Sugar Refining Company into what was essentially a legal cartel that controlled sugar prices across the United States. When people needed to sweeten their coffee, they were basically paying a tax to the Havemeyer family. The Havemeyer sugar empire wasn't just about refining. They controlled sugar importation, distribution, and pricing with the efficiency of a well-organized monopoly. They made sugar as essential as salt and almost as profitable as oil. But sugar money enabled the Havemeyers to become serious art collectors, assembling one of the most important collections of European art in American history. The Havemeyer collection at the Metropolitan Museum of Art represents decades of sugar profits converted into cultural treasure. The family's philanthropic legacy focuses on education and arts, proving that sometimes people who control life's sweeteners end up making life sweeter for everyone through cultural institutions and educational funding. Havemeyer descendants transformed from sugar merchants into cultural preservationists, showing that industrial fortunes can evolve into support systems for human creativity and education. The conclusion: old money's eternal game. So there you have it. Every major old money dynasty explained, from oil barons to railroad kings to sugar monopolists. These families didn't just get rich, they invented entirely new ways of being wealthy and then passed those methods down like family recipes for success. What's fascinating about old money dynasties is that they all followed a similar pattern: dominate an essential industry, accumulate obscene wealth, diversify into other investments, and then spend the next century converting money into cultural institutions and social influence. These families essentially bought immortality, not for themselves personally, but for their names and legacies. They turned temporary industrial advantages into permanent cultural fixtures. Every time you visit a museum, attend a university, or use infrastructure they funded, you're participating in their version of estate planning. The really wild part is that most of these fortunes were built on industries that either don't exist anymore or operate completely differently today, but the wealth remains, transformed and institutionalized into foundations, trusts, and endowments that will probably outlast the countries they were built in. Modern billionaires are still playing the same game these dynasties perfected over a century ago. Accumulate wealth through innovation or monopolization, diversify investments, create foundations, and hope your name gets attached to something that makes people forget how you actually got rich in the first place. Whether you think these dynasties represent the best or worst of capitalism, you can't deny they mastered the ultimate hack of human society. They figured out how to turn money into legacy, wealth into culture, and temporary business success into permanent social influence. And the craziest part? Some of these families are still wealthy today, living off investments and trust funds created with money their great-great-grandfathers made by controlling industries that barely exist anymore. That's not just rich, that's intergenerational financial wizardry that would make time travelers jealous.